following this story. ABC News correspondent from New York. Good morning, Aaron.
Well, good morning to you.
So, pretty extensive story by the New York Times. The premise of it is that Donald Trump is not a self-made billionaire?
Well, that's certainly one premise. The Times researched his family finances and business practices for the last year and a half, and delved deep into his father's real estate empire, the president's own financial dealings, and came up with a picture that is at odds with the president's origin story of taking a loan from his father, what he has called a small loan of $1 million, and using the art of the deal to build his real estate fortune. What the story says is that, in fact, the president took $400 million from his father and had a reliable safety net as he engaged in a series of what the paper calls dubious schemes and outright fraud to evade taxes and build his fortune.
There's one thing if your dad decides to give you $413 million. It's another thing if he breaks the law. Is it explained what is unseemly, what a dad did for his son, and what is breaking the law?
I think any trust and estates lawyer would tell you that wealthy individuals often try to find creative ways to dodge taxes and to preserve as much of their money as they can. And here you have just the specter of the President of the United States doing those kinds of things, which may have been fine, or at least, under the radar when he was just a real estate developer, but maybe cast in a different light now. And I think there are a couple of ways to look at it. In one way, it's the wealth transfer from father to son in ways that were at least unseemly, may have been dishonest, and in the Times reporting, there were instances of actual fraud. Now, there's no criminal liability here. The allegations are just too old. However, there is the possibility of civil penalties, and the state tax department here in New York has already said that they're looking into the allegations.
President Trump and the White House has said this is 100% false. But how did the New York Times, they must have gotten some tax documents. They must have gotten some paper trail. Did they explain?
It's published on the front page.
Yeah.
You've got, checks and receipts and court documents and things with the president's signature, and it's all published in the paper.
Yeah.
And for the president's attorney, he says it's 100% not true, but they do not break down point by point and offer a detailed response. This is a story that was researched for a year and a half, and the Times investigation was probably too detailed and well researched for them to just ignore. But the response so far from the White House is that it's just not true. And Sarah Sanders, the White House spokeswoman, turned her ire toward the press for constantly trying to report on the president in a negative light. The investigation, I think, in addition to poking holes in the president's, origin story, I guess, if we could call it that, also details some of the unseemly schemes that were used in some cases, ordering cleaning supplies for some of his buildings and then selling them to the tenants of those buildings at a 20% markup as one way of hiding some money. Is it illegal? Maybe not, but is it weird? Maybe.
Yeah. The New York Times also criticized itself for its own expose of Donald Trump a few years ago.
And it said that the president has so often, even before he was running for office, has so often repeated the story of how he got his start, the $1 million loan from his father, and then self-made from there, and everybody kind of bought it. But I think there's long been suspicion, at least here in New York, because the Donald Trump's exploits have been so long, covered by the tabloids, usually because Trump was leaking to them. People had a sense that his business wasn't necessarily as successful as he had portrayed it, and that there'd always been a suspicion about whether he was completely on the up and up. I mean, not to cast aspersions on New York City real estate developers, but I think it can't come as a surprise that there may have been some shady doings. But when that person becomes president and there's an investigative light that others don't get, it raises more questions. And the president, as the story dropped, was on stage in Pennsylvania talking about tax reform.
Yeah, no, I think your point is well taken. It's one thing when he is the star of a reality show, how many people care? But when you become president of the United States, the magnifying glass gets much bigger. The Times says it's based its story on more than 100,000 pages of financial documents, including tax returns from the father and some of his companies. Aaron Katursky, thanks for shedding some light on it. Have a good day.
You too, McGraw.